Chapter 1: The Day They Called Me a Burden. Before you judge my son, you should know the day my husband was buried was the same day they told me I had 2 weeks to leave the house I built my life in. I am Margaret Hale, and I thought grief was the worst thing I had to survive. That was before I overheard my son planning to sell my home behind my back to cover a $180,000 debt, before he shoved a contract in front of me that would give him control over everything, before he sent contractors into my living room while I was sleeping in a motel. But the moment he walked into that cheap room demanding my signature was the moment I opened my bag and placed the one document he feared on the table, the deed in my name, the one he never knew existed. And that was when I stopped being his safety net and started being his reckoning. Rain in Portland does not fall so much as settle into everything. It sat in the trees, in the grass, on the black umbrellas that crowded my front yard, and in the air of my living room as people murmured around paper plates and plastic cups. Someone had set a casserole dish on the counter and told me they were sorry for my loss. I nodded, said thank you, and could not remember their name a second later. I am Margaret Hale. I was a controller for a manufacturing company for almost 30 years. I have lived in this little cedar-sided house in Selwood for more than 3 decades. Until last week, I lived here with my husband, Robert. Today was the day they put him in the ground, out at the cemetery by the river. I still had damp soil under my nails from the handful of earth I dropped on his casket. People filled my house, but it felt strangely hollow. The rain on the roof was louder than their small talk. A neighbor laughed too loudly in the kitchen at something that was probably not funny. Somewhere near the doorway, I heard the scrape of dress shoes on hardwood, firm and impatient, and my stomach tensed before I turned to look. My son Jason stood just inside the living room, shoulders tight under a navy suit that did not quite fit his frame anymore. His tie was already loosened. His eyes did not move toward the photos of his father on the mantel. They moved over the room the way a buyer walks through a listing. Beside him, his wife, Kelly, smoothed the front of her black dress and slowly scanned the crown molding, the windows, the floors, as if she were mentally adding up numbers. My daughter, Danielle, lingered near the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. She caught my eye and tried to give me a small, sad smile. There was worry behind it. She looked like she wanted to say something but did not know where to begin. I told myself to breathe. In, out. I had gotten through the service. I had shaken hands and hugged people I had not seen in years. I had nodded as the pastor said Robert was in a better place, even though I was not sure I believed in places like that anymore. I could manage a few more hours of this. A cousin I barely remembered drifted away from Jason, leaving him with a clear path to me. He came over, clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder, and asked how I was holding up. I told him I was tired. That was true. He nodded too quickly, as if he had been waiting for me to say any sentence that was not about Robert. Then he cleared his throat and said there was something we needed to talk about. Not today, I thought, not here, not with casserole smell and wilted flowers, and Robert not even home in the ground yet. But Jason had that look he used to get as a boy when he had already made up his mind to jump off the roof into the snowbank. My controller brain, the part that had spent decades reading faces across conference tables, recognized resolve mixed with anxiety. He suggested we step into the dining room, somewhere quieter. Kelly joined us, moving with the smooth, self-possessed posture she always had when something mattered to her. Danielle trailed after us, but stopped at the threshold, as if she were not sure she was invited into the conversation. The dining room still smelt faintly of Thanksgiving, even though that had been months ago. Robert had refinished the table himself in our second year here. The wood gleamed under the light, lined now with sympathy cards and half-emptied coffee cups. Jason pushed a stack of napkins aside and the three of us sat down. He began with the right words. He said he loved me. He said things were going to be different now, and he wanted to make sure I was taken care of. His voice was tight, though, and his knee bounced under the table. Kelly reached over and pressed her fingers onto his leg to still him. Then she said it was not safe for a woman my age to be alone in a house this big. That phrase hit my chest like a cold hand. A woman my age? Alone? Not safe? I heard the subtext. I have spent my life listening to what people do not say. Jason went on. He said the house had stairs and old wiring, and that the neighborhood was changing. He said if something happened to me, it would take a long time for anyone to notice. Kelly nodded along at all the right places and added that there were really excellent retirement communities on the west side now, with call buttons and medical staff and social activities. She said it would give everyone peace of mind. Everyone, I noticed. Not me. Them. Danielle shifted in the doorway and looked as if she wanted to interrupt, but she stayed silent. I kept my hands folded in my lap. The gold band Robert had slipped on my finger 42 years ago pressed warm against my skin. My heart pounded, but my voice, when I finally spoke, came out calm. I told them I appreciated their concern, but I was not ready to talk about leaving my home. Jason exchanged a quick glance with Kelly. It was quick, but I caught it. It had calculation in it. He reached into his leather folder and pulled out a neat stack of papers. No clip, no coffee stain, no fold. Fresh from a printer. He smoothed them on the table in front of me, turning them so they faced my side. He said these were just basic estate planning forms. He said these would help them help me. He used phrases I had heard so many executives use over the years. Streamlining, simplifying, consolidating. He said we would need to get the house into something more manageable, perhaps by having him listed on the title, so that if anything happened, there would be no complications. I looked down at the pages, legal font, small print, signature lines. My old job sat on my shoulder like an invisible colleague. I could almost hear my own voice from years ago, telling a junior accountant to always read the fine print, especially when it came from someone who insisted there was nothing to worry about. I told Jason I wouldn't sign anything today, that my head was not clear, and that we had just buried his father. He didn't argue, but the tightness around his mouth deepened. Kelly looked at the papers like they were a train schedule, delayed but still inevitable. A little later, as people began to trickle out and the house quieted, I went into the kitchen to rinse some dishes. The window over the sink fogged slightly with steam and rain. Voices carried through from the back hallway. I didn't intend to listen, but they grew sharper. Jason was saying that the business line of credit was coming due. I heard the number, $180,000. He said the bank was no longer willing to extend interest-only payments. He said they were out of time. Kelly's voice, lower, said that this house was the only real asset left with enough equity that if they could get it listed by early summer, they could clear the debt and still have something left over. She said my retirement income would not cover my long-term care anyway, and that this was the responsible thing to do. She called it an opportunity. She always did understand how to dress desperation in nice language. I stood very still, one hand resting on the edge of the sink. The rain tapped quietly against the glass. My chest ached, but not from grief this time. It was a different kind of pain, one that starts somewhere near your spine when you realize your own child has begun to see you as an obstacle instead of a person. I dried my hands and walked back into the living room. I thanked a few more guests for coming. I hugged Danielle when she wrapped her arms around me and whispered that she would call later. Her eyes were shiny, worried. Jason and Kelly started gathering their things. As the last car pulled away and the house finally fell quiet, Jason and Kelly lingered near the door. He said we shouldn't drag things out. He said it would be best for everyone if I started looking at other options. Kelly added, in that soft voice that could cut through bone, that 2 weeks would be enough time for me to pack what I needed. After that, they could start getting the house ready for sale. Danielle protested from the bottom of the stairs. She said it was too soon, that we needed time, that this was still my home. Jason snapped back that she had her own apartment and didn't understand how much work it took to manage a property like this. He said I couldn't take care of it anymore. He did not look at me when he said it. I felt the floor tilt slightly under my feet. 2 weeks. After 32 years in this house, after 42 years with the man we had just put in the ground, my son was giving me 2 weeks. I didn't argue. I have learned over a lifetime of boardrooms and budgets and family dinners that sometimes silence is the only way to hear what someone is really capable of. I told them we could talk more later. Jason took that as agreement. Kelly gave me a tight little smile that did not reach her eyes. When the door finally closed behind them, the house exhaled. The rain grew louder again. I stood in the middle of the living room and let the quiet settle around me. My gaze drifted to the hallway that led to the small room Robert and I had always called the study. My legs felt heavier than they had that morning, but they carried me down the hall. I opened the study door and was met with the familiar smell of old paper and furniture polish. Robert's desk sat under the window, still holding the pen he had used to write checks and crossword answers. The bottom left drawer stuck a little the way it always had. I tugged it open. Inside, beneath a manila folder with tax returns from years ago, was a thick envelope with my name written on it in Robert's careful block letters. I had seen it before. He had told me, months ago, when his health began to slide, that there were papers I might need. He had not wanted to talk about it then. Neither had I. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was the original deed to the house, issued in 2015, when Robert had refinanced and then quietly transferred full ownership into my name. There was a letter from our attorney at the time, explaining the change and why it was wise given the legal trouble his company had been facing. There was a sticky note, yellowed a little at the edge, in Robert's handwriting. Just in case, it said, "You should always be protected." I stared at my name on the deed, printed in firm black ink. Margaret Louise Hale, sole owner. No co-owner, no contingent trust with the children, just me. For a long moment, I sat there in the dim light of the study, listening to the rain and the ticking of the old wall clock. My heart still hurt from losing Robert. My bones still ached from standing at the graveside, but something inside me straightened. My son thought I was a burden. My daughter-in-law saw my home as a line item on a balance sheet. They believed I would be easy to move, easy to pressure, easy to sign away. They had no idea what documents I kept or how seriously I took the numbers that defined my life. I slid the deed back into its envelope, closed the drawer, and stood up. The house was dark except for a small lamp in the hallway. I walked back toward the living room and paused there, looking at the photos of Robert smiling down at me. The storm outside might last all night. In this city, it often did. That was all right. I had weathered a lot of storms in this house. Tonight, for the first time, I understood that the fight ahead would not be about grief at all. It would be about ownership, about respect, about whether I would let my own child decide when my life here ended. I turned off the lamp and let the room slip into shadows, the deed safely tucked away, and I knew this day was not the end of anything. It was the beginning. Chapter 2: The Document They Should Have Feared. By the next morning, the rain had lightened to a mist that made the street look blurred behind the front window. I slept badly and woke early, the way you do when your mind has already started running before your body catches up. Coffee tasted like cardboard, but I drank it anyway and carried the mug into the study. The envelope with the deed sat where I had left it on the desk. Sunless light from the gray sky fell across Robert's handwriting on the front. I opened it again, not because I doubted what I had seen, but because numbers and documents have always been the way I steadied myself. The deed from 2015 listed only my name. There was also a letter from our old attorney explaining that, given the lawsuit his company had been tangled in back then, it made sense to keep the house out of reach. At the time I had read it, signed what he asked, and gone back to work. Handled, I had thought. Now I understood just how much that decision mattered. Everything about the transfer looked clean. Recorded dates, filing numbers, a clear chain of ownership. My old controller habits kicked in. I made a list on a yellow legal pad of what I had, what I might need, and where the weak spots could be. Original deed, attorney letter, tax returns that showed only my name claiming property taxes, insurance policies, utility bills. I stacked each item in a neat pile. If someone tried to contest my ownership, they would be fighting paper, and I knew how stubborn paper could be. One thing was obvious. I needed a lawyer who was not just a name on an old letter. Downtown Portland on a gray weekday feels like someone turned down the saturation on the whole world. I took the bus over the bridge rather than ask anyone for a ride. Habit, independence, maybe a little bit of pride. I got off near an old brick building that still had the faded name of a bank etched into the stone above the door. New brass letters on the glass said Price and Keller Attorneys at Law. Inside, the lobby smelled of coffee and copier toner. I told the receptionist I was there to see Sam Price. He had done some estate work for one of my former bosses, and I remembered him as the kind of man who listened more than he talked. After a short wait, he came out to greet me, a man in his middle 50s, with silver just starting at his temples and a tie that looked like he had actually chosen it himself, not just grabbed it off a rack. We sat in his office with his framed diplomas in view of a parking lot glistening with rain. I laid the deed, the letter from years ago, and my notes on his desk. I told him about Robert, about the transfer, about the conversation after the funeral, about the physical urge Jason seemed to have to move me out like you move out a desk from a closed branch. Sam read quietly for a while, lips moving slightly over the lines of legal text. Then he leaned back, folded his hands, and told me that my house was mine, 100%. No joint tenancy, no transfer on death clause to the kids. Nothing that gave Jason or anyone else the right to make decisions for me just because they shared my last name. He said that if anyone had tried to pressure me to sign away that ownership while I was grieving, a court might take a hard look at that. There are laws in Oregon about financial abuse of elders, he said. Judges do not like the idea of someone shoving papers in front of a widow right after a funeral. I felt my shoulders drop a little. Some of the tension I had been carrying since the graveside eased, replaced by something tighter and hotter. Anger has a different weight than fear. Sam asked if Jason knew about the transfer from 2015. I said no. Robert and I had never told the kids. At the time, it had seemed like unnecessary information. He nodded, said that was probably for the best, because now Jason was making assumptions that had no basis in the record. He told me he would like to get a certified copy of the deed from the county and pull any related filings. He also mentioned that the bank where we had refinanced would still have digital records. He knew a senior account manager there, a woman named Karen Liu, who had been handling mortgage accounts for years. He said Karen could confirm the history if anything went to a dispute. He asked if I had signed anything recently. I said no. He said good, because once people like my son brought in their own lawyer, things could move quickly. That caught my attention. People like my son, not just my son, a category. He asked what I wanted to do. I surprised myself by saying that I did not want to march into a courtroom and blow everything up. Not yet. I wanted Jason to show who he really was, first. I wanted the truth to be his own doing. Sam studied me for a moment. He said quietly that it was my right to set the pace. He offered to write a letter to Jason, but I shook my head. Not now. That would warn them. I told him I knew how to look small when I needed to. On the way home, the bus windows were streaked with water and fingerprints. A boy in a raincoat leaned his forehead against the glass, watching the Willamette slide by underneath us. I thought of Jason as a child, standing on this same bridge, shooting questions at his father about how many beams it took to hold it up. Somewhere between that boy and the man who counted my house as a solution to his debt, something had bent out of shape. By the time I stepped back into my living room, the light had shifted from gray to that peculiar flat white that means the clouds aren't going anywhere. My house smelled faintly of coffee and lilies. My shoes left small, damp prints on the hardwood. Jason and Kelly were already there. They stood by the mantel, my mantel, talking in low voices that cut off when they saw me. Jason asked how I was feeling. Kelly said they had brought over leftovers, the kind of thing you say when you want credit for thoughtfulness. A foil-covered dish sat on the counter behind them. I moved a little slower than usual as I took off my coat. Part of it was honest fatigue. Part of it was performance. I made my fingers fumble with the buttons more than they needed to. I made a small sound as I sat down. An old woman sound. Jason noticed. I saw his eyes flick to Kelly. He asked gently if I had thought any more about what we discussed. He did not say the word move, but it hung there. I told him my head was still full from the funeral, that I did not have answers yet, that I would need time to look at my finances and decide what made sense. That last part was bait. I watched him take it. He asked how much I was coming in from Social Security, from Robert's pension, from savings. His questions were wrapped in concern. Kelly glanced around the room slowly, her gaze resting a beat too long on the framed painting near the stairs that I knew was worth more than it looked. I kept my answers vague. Enough for groceries. Enough for the basics. Not enough, I implied, for the repairs that an old house might need forever. I let a hint of helplessness in my voice. It tasted strange there, but it did the job. Kelly reached over and squeezed my hand. She said they were only trying to make sure I didn't have to worry. Her eyes were soft, but there was calculation behind them. I had seen that same expression in executives who told employees a layoff was for their own good. Later that afternoon, Danielle knocked on the door. Her hair was still damp from the rain, and she had a bag of takeout in her hand. She looked tired in a different way, the kind of tired that comes from carrying emotions, not boxes. We ate at the kitchen table, cartons spread out where the sympathy cards had been the day before. She said she had heard what Jason had suggested. She said it made her stomach hurt. She said she thought it was too soon to be talking about selling the house. Her voice shook when she said she hated feeling like this was about money more than about me. I told her I appreciated that she cared. I also told her, as gently as I could, that I did not want her in the middle of it. She had her own life, her work at the community center, her tiny apartment in Northeast that she loved. I said I needed to handle this myself. She protested, said I shouldn't have to. I reached across the table and took her hand. I said there are some things a person has to stand in alone, even if other people are cheering from the sidelines. I promised her I would not let anyone railroad me. I did not tell her yet about the deed, one step at a time. On the kitchen wall that evening, the phone rang as the sky dimmed. I almost let it go to voicemail. Old habits. I picked it up on the fourth ring. It was not for me. Jason's name flashed on the cordless in the living room. I could hear his voice through the thin wall, raised and tight. He must have forgotten how sound traveled in this old house. He was talking to someone about payments, about being behind, about a line of credit tied to his auto shop out in Gresham. I heard the number again, the same one from the day before. 180,000. The other person on the line spoke too low for me to make out the words, but the cadence was not friendly. Jason's answers grew more clipped. He said the house would be on the market soon. He said they just needed a couple of weeks. He sounded cornered. When he hung up, there was a long pause, then the thump of his fist against something soft, maybe the couch cushion. Desperation has a particular rhythm, and I heard it in that sound. 2 days later, he showed up not just with Kelly, but with another man. This one wore a suit that fit better than Jason's, carried a leather briefcase, and introduced himself as Mark Jensen. He said he worked with families on property transfers, helping them plan for the future. His smile was professional, his eyes cool. We sat at the same dining table where we had eaten Christmas dinner every year. Mark opened his briefcase and laid out another neat stack of papers. These ones had my name and Jason's printed together in careful type. He said in smooth phrases that this was a temporary arrangement that would make things easier down the line, that putting Jason on the title now would simplify probate later, that everyone would be protected. I asked if I could look. He slid the top page toward me. My heart rate picked up in a way it had not even at the graveside. Under the legal phrasing, I could see the structure. Joint ownership, language that would allow Jason to sign on my behalf in certain circumstances. Clauses that looked harmless but tilted all the leverage his way. I had seen contracts like this before, dressed up as solutions. I traced a line of text with my finger, giving myself time to think. I let my forehead crease, let my shoulders droop a little more. I asked a few basic questions, ones any confused widow might ask. What does this part mean? Does this change where I live right now? Are you sure this is necessary? Mark answered smoothly, never slipping, pointing to sentences with a practiced fingertip. Jason watched me, eyes bright with the hope that had nothing to do with my well-being. Inside, the part of me that used to sit across from auditors and hold my ground was already labeling each clause: risk, leverage, control. I said I was tired, that my eyes were not what they used to be, that I did not feel comfortable signing something that important without sleeping on it. I apologized for being slow. I could see Jason fighting down his impatience. He told me he understood, but his jaw worked at the hinge. He said they really did need to move quickly, that the market was good right now, that delaying might cost all of us. I nodded as if I accepted the pressure. I promised I would look at it that night and we could talk again in a day or two. After they left, the house felt different. Not hollow this time, but wired, like the air before a storm. I put the contract into a folder along with the deed and the old attorney letter, and the next morning I took the bus back downtown. Sam read through the new papers without needing to sit back. His mouth tightened. He told me this was not simple estate planning. It was a power grab dressed up as concern. He said, almost quietly, that they had handed us documentation of their intent to strip me of control. I told him to keep a copy. I told him to collect whatever he needed from the county and the bank. Then I said something that made him raise his eyebrows. "Let them think I am considering it," I said. "The more they push, the clearer the picture will be of how far they are willing to go." He looked at me for a long second, then nodded. He said he had seen corporations try this sort of gradual takeover before. He had not seen many widows sit across from it this calmly. On my way home, I watched raindrops chase each other down the bus window, blurring the outlines of buildings and streets I knew by heart. It felt fitting. Jason and Kelly thought my vision was cloudy, that I could not see what they were doing. They were wrong. My view of them had never been sharper. When I stepped back into my house that afternoon, the folder with the contract and the deed felt almost weightless in my hand. I put it in the study drawer, right next to Robert's envelope, and closed it gently. I was not just defending myself anymore. I was setting the stage for what came next. Chapter 3. The day I walked away, on my terms. I woke up 3 days later with the kind of clarity that feels almost rude after grief. The rain had finally stopped. Some light pushed weakly through the blinds over my bed and landed on the framed photo of Robert on the nightstand. In it, he was standing on our front porch with a paintbrush in his hand and a smear of white on his cheek, grinning like a boy. I lay there for a moment and asked myself a very simple question. If I stay in this house while Jason is circling, am I safer or more exposed? The answer was not comfortable, but it was clear. As long as I was physically in the way, Jason would keep pushing. If I stepped aside on my own terms, I could see what he did when he thought I was no longer an obstacle. By mid-morning, I had 3 suitcases open on the bed. I filled one with clothes and shoes, one with toiletries and my pill bottles and Robert's old sweater that still smelled faintly of cedar, and one with photo albums and a small stack of books. The important papers went into a hard-sided briefcase Robert had once used for work. Before I packed them, I took the original deed and the predatory contract to Sam's office downtown. He looked surprised to see me appear without an appointment, but he brought me back right away. "I'm going to stay somewhere else for a while," I told him. He blinked. "You are leaving the house." "Temporarily," I said. "I want to see what my son does when he thinks he has room to run." He studied me, then nodded slowly. "Then these should not be under that roof," he said. He took the deed and the original documents and put them into a fireproof cabinet behind his desk. He made certified copies for me and slipped them into a folder. "Keep these with you," he said, "just in case you ever need to show someone you are not alone in this." On the way back, I stopped at my credit union and pulled a small amount of cash. Then I went home and booked a room at a modest extended stay motel just off McLaughlin Boulevard, the kind of place traveling nurses and divorced contractors use when life is in between. It was not pretty, but it had a lock on the door, a tiny kitchenette, and a view of a grocery store parking lot. For a woman who had spent years making budget stretch, that was enough. Telling Jason I was leaving was easier than I expected. He called that afternoon to check in. "I have been thinking," I said, letting my voice sound tired. "Maybe this house is too much for me right now. I'm going to stay somewhere smaller for a bit and see how it feels." There was a beat of silence on his end. Then I could almost hear the relief rush into his lungs. "That is great, Mom. Really, that sounds smart. Kelly and I can help you pack up. We can start getting the place ready. It will be so much less stress for you." "Maybe," I said. "Let us take it one step at a time." He was almost eager now. He offered a storage unit, offered to call a realtor he knew, offered everything a dutiful son would offer if you did not listen to the speed in his words. I declined most of it. I told him I already had suitcases and friends who could help me if I needed them. I didn't mention that the friend in this case was a paid lawyer with a copy of every relevant document. On my last night sleeping in that house, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and let my mind wander where it wanted. It went to the morning Robert and I moved in, our second year of marriage, when we had painted the kitchen walls a terrible yellow that we both later regretted. It went to the mornings when he would stand at the sink with his coffee and look at the rain and say, "This is home, Maggie. No matter what happens out there, this is ours." I let myself feel that for a few breaths. Then I folded the last sweater, zipped the last suitcase, and went to bed. The next day, I locked the front door, slipped the key into my pocket, and drove the 15 minutes to the motel. The room smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old carpet. The bedspread was too busy. The television remote was sticky. It didn't matter. I unpacked what I needed and lined the copies of my papers in the desk drawer next to a cheap ballpoint pen. That evening, I called my neighbor Evelyn from my new room. She lived across the street and had been bringing me over extra zucchini breads for 20 years. "I'm going to be away from the house for a while," I told her. "Jason and Kelly might be around doing things. Would you keep an eye on it for me?" There was a pause that held more than one feeling. "Of course," she said. "Is everything all right?" "Not exactly," I said, "but it will be." She didn't press. That's the kind of friend she is. It didn't take long for the calls to start. 3 days later, my phone buzzed just after noon. I was sitting at the tiny motel table going over my budget with a pencil and a legal pad. "They're in there right now," Evelyn said as soon as I answered. They had a truck. 2 guys carried in ladders and paint. Kelly was holding up curtain samples at the front window. I could picture it so clearly, I didn't need to be there. Kelly standing in my living room with swatches of fabric, deciding what would make the space more appealing to strangers. Jason talking about neutral tones and resale value. "Thank you," I said. "If you see any realtor signs go up, let me know exactly what they say." "You know I will," she said. Her voice hardened. "Margaret, I have known you long enough. If you need me to say what I saw to someone in a suit, I will." Her offer went into the same mental folder as the deed and the contract. I drove by the house the next day and again 2 days after that. I didn't stop. I just rolled past slowly like any other neighbor, checking on things. I saw the new curtains in the front window. They were beige and bland where my old ones had been a cheerful blue. There were paint cans on the porch and drop cloth spread just inside the door. Once I saw a strange car in the driveway and the woman with a clipboard standing on my front walk. I snapped photos from my car, just enough to document that renovations were happening without my consent. I sent them to Sam, along with the message. "They are definitely preparing to list it." The reply came quickly. "Good. The more they act like owners on paper that doesn't name them, the better this looks for you if we have to push back." A week after I left the house, Sam called to say he had spoken to Karen at the bank. She had confirmed the details of the 2015 refinance and transfer. He now had certified records with timestamps and clear language naming me as sole owner. He was putting it all into a single binder he jokingly referred to as my shield. My situation might have looked weak from the outside, an old woman in a cheap motel, but the file growing on Sam's shelf told a different story. Jason's desperation finally bubbled to the surface on a Thursday evening. The motel room clock said 6:30 when someone pounded on my door hard enough to rattle the chain. I looked through the peephole and saw my son, flushed and tight in the shoulders, with Kelly behind him clutching her purse close to her side. I opened the door, but left the chain in for a moment. "Mom, we need to talk," Jason said. I slid the chain free and stepped back to let them in. The room felt even smaller with the 3 of us inside. Jason looked around with open disapproval at the faded artwork, the compact kitchenette. "You cannot stay here," he said. "This is ridiculous." I'm fine, I said. It's only temporary. Kelly's eyes moved from the small bed to the scuffed table. This is not good for you. You deserve better than this. That is why we are here. Jason pulled a folded sack of papers from his jacket pocket. I recognized the contract at a glance. He laid it on the table with a hand that shook a little. I just got off the phone with the bank again, he said. They are done being patient. They want a payment in 2 weeks or they start pulling things apart. They can come after the shop, Mom. They can take everything I have built. He drew in a breath. If we sign this now, we can get the ball rolling. We can get the house listed. Get ahead of this. It's the only way. There it was. Not dressed up in nice phrases anymore. Not about my safety or my comfort. About his debt. Kelly leaned forward, her voice sharper than it had ever been with me. He is trying to keep his business alive. Do you understand what it will do to him if you decide to dig in your heels over drywall in a porch swing? You are sabotaging your own son's future. The word sabotaging hung in the stale motel air. My hands were steady as I picked up the contract and flipped through it again, more for show than out of necessity. I hear that you are scared, I said. I would be too if I owed that much money. Jason's jaw clenched. You don't get it. You've never taken a risk like this. You stayed in the same job for 30 years. You don't know what it's like to actually build something. My chest tightened, not from insult, but from the blindness of it. I thought of the nights I had stayed late at the plant to close the book so payroll could go through. The holidays I had spent at that kitchen table with spreadsheets instead of recipes, making sure there was enough to keep a roof over his head. I let that pass. I had a different point to make. I know what it's like to work for something and then watch someone else try to claim it, I said quietly. He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. I am not signing this tonight. I have told you that. I will not make a decision that big in a motel room under a deadline you did not create with me in mind. Jason took a step toward the table, voice rising. You keep talking like you are still in charge, he snapped. Look around you, Mom. You are in a room that rents by the week. You left the only house you have. You are making bad choices, and it is going to ruin everything. Kelly's eyes flashed. For a second, I saw the fear under her anger. I reached down to the floor beside my chair and lifted the bag I had brought from home. It was not the hard-sided grief case, just a simple canvas tote with worn straps. From it, I pulled an envelope with a copy of the deed inside. I laid it flat on the table, smoothing the paper with my palms. The printed words caught the thin motel light. County of Moulton, grant deed, grantee, Margaret Louise Hale. Jason's voice cut off. Kelly took a small step back. I tapped my name. You keep talking as if I am adrift, I said. You should know something. I am not out of control. I know exactly where I stand. For a heartbeat, nobody spoke. Jason stared at the document, tracking the lines of legal language, the dates, the absence of his name. His face went pale under the red. What is this? He said, but the question sounded more like air than words. A record, I said, filed years before you ever thought about using this house as collateral in your head. It says, I own my home. Not you. Not yet. Not unless I decide otherwise. Kelly swallowed hard. Why did you not tell us? She asked. Because it was not your business, I said. Until you made it your business. I let that settle. Then, without dragging the moment out, I picked up the deed, slid it back into its envelope, and slipped it into my bag. I am going to have my attorney look at that contract again, I said. If you want to keep talking about plans that include me, you can do it through him. For now, you need to leave. This is my room, and I would like some quiet. Jason opened his mouth like he wanted to fight, then closed it again. For the first time since Robert's funeral, he seemed unsure of the ground under his feet. Kelly touched his arm. "Jason," she said softly, "we should go." He looked at me like he was seeing someone he had not expected. Not a burden, not a frail old woman in a motel. Something else. Something harder to move. They walked to the door. Jason hesitated with his hand on the knob, as if there was one more argument he had not tried yet, then thought better of it. The door closed behind them with a dull click. The air in the room felt heavy, and then, slowly, lighter. I sat back in the chair, listening to the distant hum of traffic from the highway and the buzz of the old refrigerator. My heart was beating fast, but my hands were still steady. For the first time since I had stepped out of my house, I did not feel like a guest in my own life. I had shown my cards just enough. Now it was their turn to decide what they would do next in the silence I had left them. Chapter 4. The meeting that changed everything. I waited that long before I made the next move. 7 days in that cramped motel room, living out of suitcases, walking laps around the parking lot when the walls felt too close. Jason did not call. Kelly did not text. Danielle checked in twice. Gentle messages that asked if I was sleeping, eating, breathing. On the 8th day, I dialed Sam from the motel phone and told him it was time. He offered to set up a meeting with just Jason and Kelly. I shook my head, even though he could not see me. "I want Danielle there," I said. "I am done with side conversations." He understood. He called them all himself. When he sent me the confirmation a few hours later, there were 3 names on the email: Jason Hale, Kelly Hale, Danielle Hale. The subject line simply said, "Meeting regarding property and estate." The law office looked different with my family in it. The waiting room that had felt impersonal before now seemed too bright, like someone had turned up the lights on a stage. Jason paced near the window, jaw tight. Danielle sat closest to the door, clutching her tote bag like it was a life jacket. Sam stepped out and called my name. He shook my hand, then nodded to the others. "Thank you all for coming," he said. We followed him down a short hallway into a conference room with glass walls and a long wooden cable. A pitcher of water sat in the middle, next to a neat stack of glasses. At one end of the table, a thick binder lay open, tabs in different colors jutting from the edges. I sat near Sam. Jason and Kelly took the far side, sitting close but not touching. Danielle hesitated, then chose a chair closer to me than to them. That small decision said more than any speech. Sam cleared his throat. "I want to be very clear about why we are here," he said. "Margaret asked me to review some documents and actions related to her house. I have done that. Today is about making sure everyone understands the facts." Jason let out a short, dismissive breath. "We understand the facts," he said. "Mom left the house. She is not safe on her own. We are just trying to help her put things in order." Sam opened the binder and turned it so it faced Jason. "This," he said, tapping a page, "is the recorded grant deed from 2015. It shows your father refinanced the property and transferred full ownership into your mother's name. No other parties on title, no shared interest, no transfer on death clause, just Margaret." He flipped through a few more pages. "These are the property tax records for the last 8 years. Only Margaret is listed as a taxpayer. These are insurance policies for the home. Same thing. And this," he said, sliding out a sheet with a logo I recognize, "is a confirmation from Cascade Community Bank. It verifies the date and terms of that transfer." Jason's face lost some color. Kelly leaned forward, eyes scanning the pages. "That does not change the fact that she cannot manage the place alone," Jason said. His voice had an edge now. "She left. She's in a motel. That says a lot about her decision-making right now." Sam did not rise to the bait. Her choice to stay temporarily elsewhere does not erase her legal rights, he said. What it does is give us a clear view of how you two have behaved in her absence. He pulled out a small stack of glossy prints. Photos. My photos. This is your truck in the driveway. These are the painters you hired, the new curtains, the contractor sign in the yard. All of that is work done on a house you do not own. He set another sheet on the table. And these are notes from your neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Parker. She's lived across the street for 20 years. She has reported that you have been telling people the house is going on the market. Kelly bristled. We are trying to increase the value. If Mom decides to sell, that benefits her too. Sam nodded calmly. If she decides, except that is not how it was presented in the contract your attorney drafted for her. He reached into the binder and laid Mark Jensen's paperwork on the table between us. This document, Sam said, grants Jason joint ownership and the power to act on Margaret's behalf under broad conditions. It was brought to her while she was grieving, at a time when she had already expressed uncertainty. That raises questions. Jason's jaw clenched. It's a standard form, he said. My lawyer said this is how families do it. We were just trying to simplify things. Sam looked directly at him. I've been doing this for 3 decades, he said quietly. I can tell you this is not standard when the entire benefit flows one direction, especially when there is pressure and the looming financial crisis that has nothing to do with the person being asked to sign. Danielle shifted in her chair. What crisis? She said. Her voice was small but sharp. What is he talking about, Jason? Jason shot her a warning look. This is between me and Mom. No, Danielle said. If you are dragging her through all this, it's about all of us. Sam did not interrupt. He reached for another paper instead. I also have a log of phone calls with your lender. They did not give me details, but they confirmed there was a delinquent business line tied to your name. The timing of their demands lines up closely with the timing of your renewed interest in this house. The room went very quiet. Even the muffled sounds from the hallway outside seemed to fade. Jason pushed back his chair a little, knuckles whitening on the table edge. You have no idea what it's like to watch everything you worked for fall apart, he said. His voice was shaking now. I'm trying to keep my shop open. I'm trying to provide. She is sitting on a pile of equity doing nothing while I drown. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The dark circles under his eyes, the strain in his shoulders, the anger that had fear braided all through it. Part of me ached for him. That part did not excuse what he was doing. I am not your bank, I said softly. I am your mother. Kelly turned to him, voice rising. You told me it was all set. You told me your mom wanted to help. You did not say she didn't even know about that loan until now. Danielle put her hand over her mouth. You kept this from me, she whispered. You kept all of this from me. You made me feel crazy for thinking something was wrong. Jason slammed his palm on the table. You two don't get it, he said. You just sit in your apartments and judge. I'm the one out there taking risk. I'm the one trying to make something of myself. Sam let the outburst roll past, then spoke again, his tone level. The law is very clear about certain things, he said. When an older adult is pressured to sign away control of their primary residence under emotional distress, especially when the person pushing them has a financial interest, that can be considered financial exploitation. If Margaret wanted to, we could bring this to the attention of Adult Protective Services. There could be civil penalties. In some cases, there can be criminal consequences. His words landed like a weight in the center of the table. No one moved. Kelly was the first to speak. You never said it was that serious, she said to Jason. You said it was just paperwork. You said we were cleaning things up. Jason's voice dropped to a raw rasp.
I didn't think she would make a big deal out of it. I thought she would sign. She's never cared about money the way you people do. That was enough. I cared about it every day I put food on your plate. I cared about it every time I sat at this table balancing a checkbook while you slept under my roof. Do not ever tell me I don't care about money. I just refuse to let it own me. Danielle started to cry. Not the loud sobs of a child, but the quiet, contained tears of an adult who has finally seen a picture come into focus. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said. "I should have said something sooner. I should have pushed harder." I reached for her hand and squeezed. "You're here now. That matters." Sam looked at me, a question in his eyes. I knew what he was asking without words. How far did I want to take this? I sat up a little straighter in my chair. My knees protested, but I ignored them. I looked at Sam. "Are we finished here?" I asked. "For now," he said. "I think everything that needed saying has been said." I picked up my purse, gave Danielle's hand one more squeeze, and walked to the door. No one tried to stop me. No one called after me. The hallway outside felt strangely quiet after the intensity of that room. As I stepped out into the gray Portland afternoon, the chill air hit my face and cleared my head. The building's glass doors closed softly behind me, shutting away the raised voices and the papers and the weight of their expectations. I stood for a moment on the sidewalk, watching cars move slowly through the wet streets, and felt something close to peace settle in my chest.
Chapter 5. The House That Returned to Its True Owner. The next step was obvious to me long before I put it into words. The motel had given me what I needed, a little distance and a clear look at who my son had become. It was time to go home. 2 days after the meeting at Sam's office, I stood again on the sidewalk in front of my house in Selwood with my keys in my hand. The sky was doing that Portland thing where it could not decide between clouds and sun. Soft light filtered through the maple tree out front, and the windows I had cleaned myself more times than I could count. New beige curtains hung there now, but the bones of the place were still mine. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The smell hit me first. Paint and dust and the faint trace of the vanilla candle I had burned the night before Robert died. Drop cloths were folded in a heap near the fireplace. A bucket with dry rollers sat in the corner. That stung in a small, petty way. They had not even bothered to clean up properly. I set my bag down and walked slowly through the rooms. The walls in the living room were a safer off-white now instead of the warm color I had chosen years ago. The blue curtains I loved were gone, but the rods were the same. Furniture had been moved, some pictures taken down. In the hallway, a nail stuck out where our wedding photo had hung. I touched the spot and felt a pang, then a kind of quiet resolve. This could all be fixed. I spent the next few days undoing what needed undoing and leaving alone what did not matter. I took down the bland curtains and put my own back up, smoothing the fabric where it fell. I rehung the photo of Robert in his paint-stained t-shirt and the picture of the kids at the coast when they were small and still liked to hold my hand. I scrubbed the counters, swept the floor, opened the windows to let in air that smelt like wet earth and new leaves. In the evenings, I sat in Robert's old chair by the front window with a mug of tea and let my mind wander toward the future instead of circling the past. For the first time in weeks, the idea of time ahead of me did not feel like a burden. It felt like space. Jason finally called 3 days after I moved back in. His name lit up my phone where it sat on the kitchen counter. For a moment, I considered letting it ring out. Then I answered and leaned against the sink, looking at the backyard as his voice came through. "Mom, I am sorry," he said. "I know that meeting got out of hand. I said things I should not have." There was a pause.
the sound of him breathing. I did not mean to make you feel attacked. I just feel like everything is collapsing, and I reached for the only thing that made sense. Dad would have wanted you to help me. He would not want the shop to go under. Old habits stirred, the ones that used to jump to patch every tear before it spread. I pressed my palm flat against the cool countertop to keep myself anchored. I believe you are sorry for how it came out, I said. But I also think you're still hoping I will say yes to something I have already said no to. He did not deny it. I just need a bridge. If I can get this one payment covered, I can catch up. The house is the only thing with enough value. It's not like you're using the equity, you're just sitting on it. There it was again, the story he told himself. I have given that a lot of thought, I said, and my answer has not changed. I am not going to borrow against this house or sell it to bail out your loan. Your choices are your responsibility, Jason, not mine, not your father's memory. Mine is to keep a roof over my head and to protect what he and I built. His voice sharpened. So that's it. You'd rather watch me lose everything than loosen your grip on a bunch of wood and plaster? I closed my eyes for a moment. I would rather watch you face the consequences of your own decisions than teach you that you can gamble with my life and never pay the price. I love you. That has not changed. But love is not the same as rescue. He was very quiet for a long beat. I guess I know where I stand, he said finally. You do, and you will always have a place as my son if you want it, but you will not have a claim on my house. After we hung up, my hand shook a little as I set the phone down. Then, I opened the settings and blocked his number. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, just a firm line drawn in a place that needed it. If he wanted to reach me again, he could go through Sam. I would not be ambushed by another plea wrapped in guilt on a Tuesday afternoon. Danielle came by that weekend, a grocery bag on her arm, and her 12-year-old niece in tow. Choli had Jason's eyes and Kelly's cautious posture, but she smiled at me in a way that was all her own. Aunt Danny said we were doing a work day, Choli said, holding up a sponge like a badge. We spent the afternoon putting the house back into a shape that felt like mine. Danielle helped me rehang the photographs that had been stacked in a corner. Choli dusted the baseboards and chattered about her science project and the stray cat that visited their backyard. At one point, she stopped in front of the wall of family pictures and studied a photo of herself as a toddler on this same living room rug. She said, I remember this. Mom said this house was too old and weird, but I like it. Her words warmed something in me. I like it too, I said, very much. Later, when Choli went out back to kick at the damp leaves, Danielle and I sat at the kitchen table with our elbows on the worn wood. I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner, she said, about Jason, about how much he was using you as a backup plan. You wanted to believe the best, I said. That's not something to be ashamed of. It just means now you know where the edges are. She nodded. I've been talking about this a lot in therapy, about how our family handles money and guilt like they're the same thing. I don't want to keep repeating that. I don't want Choli to grow up thinking it's normal to treat people like resources. Then you will do it differently, I said. That is all any of us can hope for our children, that they do it a little better. The following week, I sat again in Sam's office, this time with the binder open to a different set of papers. These were calm documents, no hidden traps, no tilted language. A new will, drafted in clear terms, naming me as the sole owner of the house for as long as I was alive, and after I died, transferring it to Choli in trust with Danielle as the trustee until she came of age. Sam walked me through it slowly, making sure I understood each paragraph. Then he slid the pen across the table. "This puts it in writing," he said. "Your house will not be something Jason can circle forever. It will either be yours or, one day, your granddaughter's." I signed. My name looped the way it had on school permission slips and mortgage checks and the back of Robert's last birthday card. Something in my shoulders let go. On the way out, I stopped at the front desk to make a payment and leave a copy of my new contact information. Life reduced neatly to forms and signatures, but in this case, it felt like armor, not a cage. Back at home a few days later, I sat at the kitchen table and drafted one more document. This one, not on legal letterhead, just a piece of my own stationery, the good kind I used to save for thank you notes. My handwriting is not as steady as it used to be, but the words were clear. I wrote to Jason and Kelly that I had updated my will. I told them the house was not theirs now and would not be theirs later. I wrote that I had decided to leave the property to Choli for her future, and that my hope is that she would use it as a place of safety, not as a chip in someone else's gamble. I did not scold. I did not lecture. I simply laid out the facts the way I had balanced ledgers my whole life. At the end, I added one line. I am giving this house to the future, not to fear. I enclosed a copy of the deed and a copy of the relevant page of the will, then sealed the envelope and mailed it the old-fashioned way. No text, no email, no room for misinterpretation or excuses about not seeing it. There was no reply. That was an answer too. Weeks went by. Spring edged into summer. The maples thickened, the rain backed off, and the light in the living room shifted from gray to something almost golden in the evenings. I settled into routines again. Coffee at the window, phone calls with Danielle, occasional visits from Choli, who began to treat the house more and more as a second home, doing homework at the dining room table and leaving a sweatshirt draped over the back of a chair. One Saturday, she and I stood on the front porch together, watching bicycles roll past and a couple walking their dog on the opposite sidewalk. The air smelt like distant barbecues and cut grass. Choli leaned against the railing. "I like that it's always the same here," she said.
My room changes all the time. Mom moves furniture. Dad's place feels like a garage most of the time. But this house feels like it remembers me. I looked at her profile, her hair tucked behind one ear, the small scar at her eyebrow from when she fell off her bike here years ago. This house is good at remembering, I said, and it is very good at keeping things steady when people are busy making messes. She smiled and rested her head briefly on my arm. That small weight was worth more than any number Jason might have written on a loan application. As the sun slid lower, the front steps warmed under my feet. I thought about the path we had taken to get here, the funeral, the contracts, the motel room, the long table at the law office. Loss layered with betrayal, and then slowly with something like recovery. Not perfect, not without scars, but steadier. People like to talk about revenge as if it is fire, all heat and flash. What I had chosen felt different. It felt like drawing tidy lines on a ledger and refusing to let anyone write in the margins. It felt like saying no, and then standing there long enough for that no to matter. It felt like handing the keys of your life back to yourself. If you are listening to this and you have ever felt like property instead of a person, if someone you love has tried to put their name on your front door in ways you did not agree to, I hope you hear this part clearly. You are allowed to protect what is yours. You are allowed to say no even when it makes other people angry. You are allowed to write a different ending than the one they planned for you. And if any piece of my story sounds too familiar, maybe it is time to take a quiet look at your own papers, your own boundaries,
your own house, whatever that looks like for you, and decide who truly owns it.